behind Skippy and Peter Pan. They just couldn't seem to catch up. That is, until they adopted the slogan, Choosy Moms Choose Jiff. It implied that smart, discerning women buy Jiff peanut butter, and then Jiff was propelled to the top of the peanut butter market by women who were ready to be smart and discerning, choosy moms. We can see why that slogan strikes a chord, can't we? We all want to be smart. We want to be choosy when it comes to choosing the best for our family. So let me ask you today, are you ready to be a choosy ministry wife? Choose Jesus. We might not feel like we have many choices to make when it comes to serving alongside our husbands in ministry. After all, we're not giving the sermons. We may not be attending the leadership meetings or making those heavy-hitting business decisions, but we still have choices to make. We can choose to worry when the church finances are tight and the books are in the red. We can choose to be discouraged when a family leaves and the numbers are trending down. We can choose to be jealous of that church down the street with the huge paid-off facility and the song leader that sounds like they belong in Nashville. We can choose to put up walls when people criticize, make snarky remarks. We can choose to grumble and complain. We can choose to exhaust ourselves, filling every ministry hole and fixing every problem in the church. Or we can choose Jesus and the life and the peace and the direction that he provides and have our confidence in him. Listen, I'm not naive when it comes to the struggles and the difficult emotions that we face. I want you to know I get it. Ministry life can be hard. It can be discouraging. It's exhausting at times. I've been a ministry wife for 17 years. My family has been through the ringer too. I know. It can be rough. Listen to this very real, raw comment of a ministry wife. She says, I'm tired of the judgment. I'm tired of the criticism. I'm tired of people assuming that they should be my husband's first priority instead of his family. I'm tired of people having certain expectations of me because I'm a ministry wife. I'm tired of having to justify the decisions that we make. After all, we have lives outside of the church. Maybe ministry life isn't for me since I don't want it to encompass 100% of my life, and I realize that doesn't sound a lot like Jesus. Can't you just hear the struggle in her words? Can't you just hear the strain and the angst? And maybe you can relate to that right now. Maybe that's where you're at, and you, like this woman, are saying to yourself, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. Maybe I just don't have what it takes because how I feel right now and the thoughts I'm having right now, they just don't sound a lot like Jesus anymore. Friend, I have good news. You're not alone. Look around you. You're surrounded by sisters in Christ who know some of those same struggles and have some of those same feelings of hardship and difficulty and exhaustion. We're in this together. But even better than the company of one another, we have the companionship of Christ. Because choosy ministry wives choose Jesus. We don't get to choose the obstacles we face, but we can choose Jesus. And if you're not quite sure how this plays out in the circumstances that you find yourself in and what it looks like when the rubber meets the road, take heart. That's just what we're going to talk about today. So in addition to being a ministry wife and a homeschool mom, I have the privilege of writing women's Bible studies. I have always loved to nerd out on the stories of women in Scripture. And one of the reasons that I love doing this so much is that I find their stories very relatable. Looking at their lives gives me the encouragement that I need to face my own sin struggles and my own difficult emotions, because I see just how their sticky situations played out. And I see just how God came near, and I see just what he was doing for eternity right in the middle of their mess. So I want to do all that with you today. I want us to look at a woman in Scripture who looks an awful lot like us when we are struggling in our ministry roles. She's a woman who wants to serve Jesus so badly. She wants to do what's right, and she's striving and trying with every ounce of her being to serve Jesus in the way that everyone else expects her to, and in the way that she expects herself to. But she's just not crushing it. In fact, the weight of it all is crushing her. This woman that I can relate to so well when I'm struggling in my ministry role is Martha. So I want us to peek in on the story of Mary and Martha today. I want to go there because it speaks so clearly and so simply to the concept of choosing well, and why, as choosy ministry wives, we must choose Jesus. If you want to follow along, you can turn to Luke 10:38 to 42. I'll read the passages in its entirety because it's just 4 short verses, and they have so much to say to us as choosy ministry wives. So this is Luke 10, verses 38 to 42. I'll be reading in the NIV, verse 38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care? My sister left me to do the work by myself. Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Indeed, only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." There are 3 questions I want us to grapple with as we come to this text today. What is my focus? Whose burden am I bearing, and who am I listening to? So again, that's what is my focus? Whose burden am I bearing, and who am I listening to? So first, what is my focus? In verse 40 of this passage, it says that Martha's distracted by the work she's doing. Her focus is drawn away from where it should be. Instead of living in the reality that the Messiah, the anointed one, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who her people had waited thousands of years to arrive, is sitting right there in her home, she's bustling in the kitchen. She's focused on searing the tilapia and baking the bread and pouring the wine and preparing the foot washing basins. But Jesus is there. Move over, Martha Stewart. This Martha is going to be the hostess with the mostest. But before we're too hard on Martha for this, we have to understand that in her day, this is exactly what's expected of a Jewish woman. It'd be a shame to fall short. So there's this pressure, there's this cultural expectation that Martha is going to host, and she is going to host well. And she's doing everything in her power to live up to people's expectations for her and her expectations for herself as well. Can anyone relate to that? To feeling pressure to meet certain expectations of others or even of ourselves? But we see in Martha's case, that's catastrophic. Why? Because it distracts her. She has the opportunity of a lifetime to be with Jesus in the flesh. And she's bustling about in the kitchen instead, grumpy, frustrated. Sometimes too busy to make the most of the opportunities that are right before our eyes. During a normal Friday morning rush hour at a DC metro station, an unassuming man opened up his violin case and began to play. As he performed, the commuters rushed by. But what they didn't realize was that he was world-famous, award-winning, best-selling Carnegie Hall musician Joshua Bell. And he was playing some of the most difficult to master, beautiful pieces ever written on a $14 million Stradivarius violin built in the 1700s. It was one of the most rare, valuable instruments in the world. So this is a masterful musician playing a masterful piece on a masterful instrument, wearing a ball cap and jeans. Only 7 people stopped to listen to his performance. Over 1,000 people hurried by without a glance. They were too distracted to recognize a musical genius wearing blue jeans. So let's ask ourselves today, where is our focus? Are we like the DC commuters, too busy to stop and listen to music of unmatched beauty? Are we like Martha, so busy serving Christ according to the expectations of others, too busy to truly even focus on him? Is your ministry to-do list so long that your focus is on what needs done more than the one you're doing it for? May I suggest that if we're feeling worried and upset and anxious and troubled and fearful and frustrated or even exhausted, that maybe our real problem isn't the snarky member of the congregation, or maybe the real problem isn't our lack of volunteers, or maybe the real problem isn't attendance or finances, or maybe the real problem isn't the pressure that's on our husband or the rundown facility. Can I suggest that if we're struggling, perhaps our biggest problem is distraction from Jesus? And this brings us to the second question that I want us to consider this morning as we talk about choosing Jesus. I want us to think not only about where our focus is, but I also want us to ask ourselves, whose burden am I bearing? Looking back at the story of Martha, we see she's so preoccupied with her to-do list, so burdened and so encumbered by these preparations that she's making that she backslides into an all-out funk. She is on a one-way trip on the struggle bus, and she's pleading with Jesus, "Don't you care? My sister left me to do the work by myself. Tell her to help me." Anyone else felt that way? When you're trying to get volunteers? trying to get people to help you with a ministry event? Come on, Jesus. I'm trying to serve you here, and I'm exhausted. Everybody's saying no. I can't do this all by myself. Can't you send somebody to come help me? I know I can relate. I've been a card-carrying member of the Martyrs Like Martha Club, and let me tell you, it's miserable. I don't want to live like that. But thankfully, Jesus told Martha exactly where she went wrong. We find it in verses 41 and 42, and I think so often I need to hear these words when I get into that martyr like Martha funk. He says, verse 41 says, "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what's better, and it will not be taken away from her." But I wonder if this response felt a little like a gut punch to Martha. Suddenly she realizes she's been serving the wrong master, her to-do list. You know, she's probably serving the wrong peanut butter too, right? Jesus started his response to Martha with tender, Martha, Martha. And we know he felt a deep affection for her. Surely Jesus cared for Martha, but he cared too much to let her wallow in her own self-pity. So instead of giving Martha what she really wanted, which was a rebuke of her sister Mary, Martha got the rebuke herself. She had felt like the victim in her feelings of overwhelm and struggle because she was so sure she was in the right, serving Jesus. But no one asked her to bear the heavy burden that she had on her shoulders. Friends, this isn't rocket science, is it? May I propose that if we're feeling heavy laden and burdened and overwhelmed and discouraged right now, that we're bearing a burden no one ever asked us to bear. How do I know? Spoiler alert, Jesus' burden isn't like that. You know this. His burden is light. We read it in Matthew chapter 11, verse 30. Jesus is the one who turns water into wine. He's the one who multiplies a few fish to feed thousands. He calms the storms and raises the dead and causes the blind to see. There is nothing we face that he can't overcome. And yet, so often, I scramble and I scurry about as if I know what's best and if I have all the strength and the wisdom and the answers and the direction that I need. So many times I take on a task with a, I got this kind of attitude, and I forget just who it is I'm serving and just how incredible he is. And then I'm surprised when it all goes south. So now, when I end up in that place, when I recognize in myself those feelings of worry and upset, I know to say to myself, Rachel, stop being a Martha. You're worried and upset, but are you doing the one thing that's needed? Are you choosing Jesus? Choosy ministry wives, choose Jesus. And according to Jesus, it was Martha's sister Mary who had made the better choice. What was she doing? We find the answer pretty clearly stated. Going back to verse 39, it says, she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. Now you might be thinking, this sounds pretty good. I'm tired. I could use a rest, sitting down for a while. Hey, that sounds like just what I need. But before you break open the bonbons and schedule your spa day, let me get a word in edgewise. Yes, of course, the Lord absolutely wants us to have healthy rhythms of Sabbath and rest in our lives. But Mary's not resting. She's listening. She's learning. And this is so key, friends. Why? Because as great as a nap and a break and a bubble bath are, they're not a permanent solution to our feelings of overwork and overwhelm, because when we're struggling to strive and to bear our burdens without Christ, those burdens are going to be waiting for us right after the bathwater is drained. But not if we listen to Jesus. So the scene in Luke 10 isn't a scene of rest, it's a classroom. And this brings us to the third question I want you to ask yourself this morning. I want you to not only ask yourself, what is my focus? And whose burden am I bearing, but also, who am I listening to? In the case of Mary, this meant sitting at the feet of the rabbi when your culture and your sister expect you to be hustling and bustling in the kitchen. Choosing Jesus meant sticking out, being different for Mary. And it just might mean the same for us. I know it has for me. In my life, choosing to listen to Jesus has meant being willing to have another baby, and another baby, and another baby. 8 so far. Even though it goes against the sensibilities of our culture and stretches me far beyond my own abilities. Choosing to listen to Jesus in my life has meant spending my Saturday mornings tucked away, writing women's Bible studies, even though it seemed like the most ludicrous idea at first. And I'm sure you have your own stories and examples of how you've listened to Jesus and learned from him in your lives. This isn't our first rodeo. We know how following God's lead sometimes means going against the grain, going against the culture, going against our families of origin, even against our own sensibilities. But I'm guessing so many of us also know just how sweet it is when we do. Because living a life sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening to him, learning from him, following him is a life of true blessing, of true joy and peace and hope. No, it doesn't mean a life of ease or comfort or wealth or fame, but let me tell you something. It's better. After all, Christ tells us that if we strive to find our life, we lose it. It's only in losing our lives in him that we truly find it. So let's press into him today. And in those areas where we're feeling worried and upset, let's remember our focus shouldn't be on our circumstances. Our focus should be on Christ. And in those areas where we're feeling burdened, let's remember that his burden is light. And his is the one we're called to bear. And let's stop to think. Are we scrambling around, frazzled and frustrated, serving Christ in our way and on our own strength? Or are we listening to Jesus and learning from him? So let's take a moment in the quiet this morning to ask ourselves, what is my focus? Whose burden am I bearing, and who am I listening to? And remember, choosy ministry wives, choose Jesus.